friends, long time no see. I'm going to go through all of the books that I read during the first quarter of the year from January to March. I haven't felt like filming for a little while, so it's a fair amount of books, and I felt inspired to film today, so I'm going to try and do this succinctly. So sit back, grab a snack, and let's get into it, starting with January's reads. Nine Princes in Amber by Roger Zelazny and narrated by Alessandro Giuliani. This is a fantasy about a man named Corwin who learns that he and his large family are from a place called Amber and are embroiled in a conflict for the throne. And this was 3 out of 5 stars. Definitely a very unique premise once you get deeper into it. There are multiple realities in this book, and it takes place in our world, but there are multiple realities, and there are these cool cards similar to tarot that help with communication. The audiobook narrator was very good, but you don't really get to know any of the characters. The writing itself is very plot driven and matter of fact, and I don't know, it kind of just started to lose me in the middle. I don't think that I'm going to continue the series. The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. This is a thriller novella about a guy who is taking a British citizenship test, but the test goes sideways and things turn into a matter of life and death. This was crazy. 5 out of 5 stars. I flew through this, and it's really short. It's just over 100 pages, so like if you start it, just get ready to just like buckle down for a wild and just horrific ride. I found so much about what's going on in this story just morbidly fascinating. It just kind of appeals to the things that I kind of like to contemplate and think about as thought experiments. Highly recommend it. A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 3rd book in the Court of Thorns and Roses fantasy series, which is about a girl named Feyre who gets involved with powerful fae in order to save her family, and romance and danger ensues. And there's a lot of politics in this one compared to other ones, trying to form alliances for an impending war, and this continued to have more of what I do enjoy about Maas's writing, but it also had what felt like just an extra helping of things that I personally don't enjoy as much. But this was a 4 out of 5 star. I enjoyed it overall, and I will be filming a whole separate spoiler-filled review for this if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts, so I will link that once that's uploaded. The Electric Kingdom by David Arnold, narrated by Therese Plummer. This is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi taking place decades after this fly flu wipes out most of humanity, and a girl named Nico is on a mission to find this mythical portal and comes across others along the way, and it's about them finding camaraderie and hope in a hopeless world. This was a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's slow-paced, character-focused, has beautiful writing, you know, it's very tender, you know, has some very tender and fragile relationships, and the way it ends is, it's poetic, I guess, but doesn't really resolve anything due to the nature of it. I did enjoy the journey, but the ending wasn't satisfying to me. Harrow the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. This is the 2nd book in the sci-fi fantasy series The Locked Tomb, and the 1st book is Gideon the Ninth, which follows Gideon and Harrow Hark, who is on the cover of the 2nd book. Harrow is a necromancer, and Gideon is her sword-wielding buff cavalier, and they go to this competition with the goal of Harrow becoming a super powerful necromancer called a lictor. And this 2nd book was supremely confusing for most of it, which is by design, but it was not an easy read. This was not an easy read, but Muir's writing style is funny, it's kind of edgy, it can be haunting and beautiful sometimes as well, and you have to just trust that everything will eventually make sense, because for so much of it, it doesn't make sense. And I rounded this up to 4 stars, but this is more like 3.75 or 3.5. I both enjoyed it and was frustrated by it at the same time. But overall, in hindsight, I liked it, and I will be continuing on to the 3rd book. Queenie and the Krakens by Aleera, Anaya, Ceres. This is an explicit paranormal romance that takes place in the Caribbean about a woman named Queenie who gets involved with the men of the Kraken motorcycle club after she witnesses the murder of one of their members. And this is a reverse harem situation where they all fall for the girl, and I was so out of my lane reading this kind of book. I went in with very low expectations, but honestly, like, it wasn't that bad. I enjoyed myself more than I thought I would. This was like a 3.75. I rounded up to 4. Everyone uses the F word constantly throughout this book. Every page has at least one F word. And of course, there were many sex scenes that were good. I don't know. It was a new experience for me that I didn't hate, but I was more fascinated by it than like really enjoying it. But you know, for what it was, I was entertained. Her Name is Night by Yasmin Angoe. This is a contemporary thriller about an assassin named Nina Knight who works for an organization called The Tribe that's dedicated to protecting and advancing the peoples of Africa. And this follows a split timeline of Nina's very traumatic past as a victim of human trafficking, and also in the present day when a chain of events pushes her to seek vengeance and protect the people that she loves. And this was a 4.5 star, very intense and impactful story. Nina was a strong, believable character. You know, she was a badass, and the bad guys are evil and vicious, and the side characters were also great. The only part that I didn't really love was the romance, which felt insta-lovey and kind of shallow to me, but overall I was very hooked by this once I got into it. This is the first in a trilogy, and I think that you could read this as a standalone, but I do plan to continue on with the series. Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a sci-fi novella about Binti, who is the first of the Himba people to ever be accepted to this prestigious university, and she gets on a spaceship to travel there, but gets into a survival situation when the ship is attacked. And I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. This is the first novella in a series of novellas, but I'm not going to continue. The way that the central conflict was resolved was really fast and oversimplified, and the terrible things that happened on the ship were just like completely glossed over by everyone. And the magic is based on math, which is interesting, sounds interesting, but it isn't explained nearly enough. It just didn't mean anything because I didn't know what was going on. And the story just lacked impact, along with a lot of other things, and it ends really abruptly. So those are all the things that I read in January. Let's move into the books I read in February. So we have The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie, narrated by Rosa Escoda. This is a Korean-inspired fantasy about Mina, who gives herself up as a sacrifice to the sea god. But it turns out that the sea god is in an enchanted sleep, and she has to team up with various spirits and other creatures in the spirit world to try and find a way to wake him. And this was a 3.5 out of 5. This was very whimsical and colorful. It's very reminiscent of a Ghibli film, like Spirited Away in particular, and I think that this was objectively good, very good as a folktale type story, beautifully written. It's kind of very tender and sweet, but just personal taste, it wasn't something that I fell in love with or was necessarily enthralled by, but it was good. Children of Memory by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the third book in the Children of Time sci-fi series, and it focuses on humanity's efforts to terraform other planets for survival. And in all of the books, we basically see what happens in various different places as a result of that effort, and evolution happens unexpectedly. And this book follows visitors who end up infiltrating a human colony, hoping to learn about them and help them, but something is just off about things there. This was 4 out of 5 stars. I think that some parts could have been just edited down, but overall it was very interesting. It reflects on, what makes something sentient. And this is a solid series, and if a 4th book comes out, I will definitely read it. And if the idea of giant sentient spiders intrigues you, then I recommend that you check out the first book of the series. Havenfall by Sarah Holland. This is a contemporary fantasy that takes place at an inn called Havenfall in the mountains of Colorado, and there are doorways to other worlds beneath the inn, and the main character Maddie has to stand in as the innkeeper while her uncle is recovering from injury, and the peace between worlds is threatened, and a deadly creature is on the loose, kind of on the grounds. This was a 2 out of 5. The author is very repetitive with her descriptions. It just felt very insipid. Maddie is just constantly describing how scared she is and not being useful, which was just not fun to read about. The world building and characters are just really lacking in substance. There are plot holes. And this started out okay, but it just went downhill and never stopped. The Fires of Vengeance by Evan Winter, narrated by Prentice Onayemi. This is the second book in the African-inspired fantasy series The Burning. And the first book, The Rage of Dragons, is about a man named Tao pushing himself to become the strongest swordsman in the land to get revenge on the men who killed his father. And the second book has more politics and strategy and involves Tao helping to reclaim a city and a throne while continuing to seek his revenge. This was 4 out of 5 stars. It took a little while for me to really get into the story, but once I got into the world again, I was hooked. The narrator is great, fantastic. There is a really cool underworld with demons, and the magic is cool, and there are some funny comedic moments, even though this is a pretty dark and intense story. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the third book, which isn't out yet, but hopefully will be soon. Darkfever by Karen Marie Moning. This is a paranormal urban fantasy about a girl named Mac who travels to Dublin to try and track down the person who murdered her sister, and she discovers that she has the ability to see the deadly fae, and she partners with a mysterious man named Jericho to try and solve the mystery, as well as find this ancient book of dark power. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. This is a paranormal romance series, but this first book has almost no romance. This has a lot of Irish fae folklore, and most of the fae in this book are, scary and monstrous, which is some of my favorite kind, but I had some issues just with the writing, and I didn't love any of the characters. The mysteries were intriguing, but I'm probably not going to continue the series. Stalking Darkness by Lynn Flewelling. This is the second book in the Night Runner high fantasy series. The main characters, Sarah Gill and Alec, are mentor and protege, respectively, and they are spies, intelligence gatherers, thieves, and there's a war on the horizon, as well as the threat of a dark power being resurrected. And this was 5 stars. The ending was really intense, and the lead up to it throughout the second half was pretty horrific at times, just very dire. And I just think the characters are amazing and endearing, just like they were in book 1. The slow burn romance between Sergil and Alec is wonderful, and I actually cried a little bit at the very end of this book. Just really enjoyed it and looking forward to book 3. Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. This is a graphic novel series about 2 teenage boys, Nick and Charlie, who become friends and fall in love. In this volume, they're having to navigate wanting to be more physically intimate with each other and confronting the fact that Nick is applying to universities potentially far away, and one of the most wholesome and adorable series I've ever read. Each volume has been 5 stars, including this one. It's funny, super cute, sometimes sad, just really good. And the next volume, volume 6, whenever it comes out, I believe will be the final book in the series. Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This is the first book in the Wayward Children series of novellas that are all about kids who went through portals to other worlds, but are now back in our world and have to kind of deal with that reality. And this book follows Nancy, who went to an underworld, and she's hoping to find her door to return there. And there is a murder mystery to solve. This was a 3.5 out of 5. The writing was very whimsical, but also matter of fact in a way. The characters were all very unique. There is trans and ace representation. The book is about acceptance. The ending was a little unceremonious, but I still like this overall. I do want to continue the series and see if I enjoy it more just as a whole, because each book follows different characters. Dark Air by C.S. Pacat, narrated by Christian Coulson. This is the second book in the Dark Rise fantasy series, and it follows a boy named Will and his companions who are fighting for the side of the light and the threat of the return of the Dark King. And this was tragic and intense. The ending just had me tripping over myself in just despair and frustration. The way things develop is so compelling, and the characters are complex and complicated, and it's about, you know, fighting against destiny. The fate of the world is at stake here. I just highly recommend this series, and this was probably was a 4.5 just because it was a bit slow for me around the early middle, but rounding up to 5. Frankly in Love by David Yoon. This is about a Korean American teenager named Frank Lee who has to fake date one of his Korean friends while secretly dating someone else because his parents are racist. And this was 4 out of 5 stars. The fake dating situation is only the first half of the book. The rest of it doesn't have that, and it gets kind of heavy. It was a good book, very introspective and honest, but also kind of melancholy. I wouldn't recommend this if you're like looking for something, you know, light and happy and cute, despite the kind of colorful, cute cover, but it was good. Mrs. Death by Selena Godin, narrated by the author. This is loosely a story about a man named Wolf who talks with Mrs. Death and documents her story and experiences. And I say loosely a story because this was more like a collection of poems and musings about death. And this wasn't my style. I forgot that this was written partially in verse when I got it. I wouldn't have picked it up if I had remembered that, to be honest. I gave this 2.5 stars, and I didn't get hopeful, you know, or positive vibes about this. It just felt like the author's catharsis writings that she decided to turn into a book. The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Demeline. This takes place in Canada in a future where everyone but Indigenous people have lost the ability to dream, so they are hunted and killed for their bone marrow, which is where their ability to dream lies. And this was another 2.5 star. I respect the social commentary aspect of the decimation of indigenous culture and people, but the actual plot of this was just not for me. This is basically a book about people surviving in the wilderness, and that's it. The dream stuff is not explained at all, or even, it's not even very relevant to the story. It's just used as the reason for the characters being hunted. It's not the story that I was hoping for based on the blurb. Moving on to March reads, I have The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson. This is a sci-fi fantasy about a man named John who wakes up with amnesia in a world like similar to ours, but in a medieval time period. He is being hunted and is trying to escape and recover his memories. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, even though it wasn't bad. I just didn't really care about any of the characters or the conflicts. The way that John was written was a little silly and just kind of felt like trying too hard to be funny, and he's, I'm just a guy, and I did get a little more invested in the second half, but overall, this was just kind of a forgettable shrug, a little bit. I'm a huge fan of Brandon's Cosmere works, but this is non-Cosmere standalone, and it was just kind of a dud for me. Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. This is a Chinese-inspired fantasy about Maya, who poses as one of her brothers in order to participate in a competition to become the Emperor's tailor. And she has to go on a quest to gather these rare materials to sew the 3 legendary dresses of a goddess. I loved this. 5 stars. This was everything that I wanted from a magic steeped in poison, but just never got from it. The slow burn romance was fantastic. This was fast-paced and engaging and just easy to follow. The magic was neat. There's a map at the front of this book. The cover art is gorgeous. I just kind of adored everything about it, and I can't wait to see how everything resolves in the next book. It's a duology. The Bone Orchard by Sarah Muller, narrated by Elle Potter. This is a fantasy mystery about a woman called Charm, who was the mistress of the Emperor, and on his deathbed, the Emperor tasks her with finding out which of his sons caused his death in exchange for her freedom. I think that my camera must have overheated because I lost a couple minutes of footage, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it in post. So I gave The Bone Orchard 4 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved the world building, the beautiful writing, and the characters. Charm essentially has DID, and her personalities are given physical bodies. And it was so interesting. I was really hoping that this would be a 5-star. I wanted to give this 5 stars so bad for those reasons, but the plot of this was hard to follow. It was meandering, and there would be scenes where I didn't just understand the purpose of it, or I'd be like, who is this person again? And why are they important? What am I supposed to be taking away from this? And the cohesiveness just really suffered because of it. And objectively, I think this was more like a 3-star, but I'm giving it a 4 because I just loved the vibe and the idea and the characters so much. And I definitely want to read more from this author if she writes more in the future. And then I read The Sunlit Man by Brandon Sanderson, and this is about a man called Nomad who is on the run through the Cosmere and arrives on this planet where the day side is so hot and deadly that it kills you within seconds, and he becomes enmeshed in the local people there and their troubles, and they have to constantly be moving to outrun the sun, and a man called the Cinder King who is trying to make an empire. And I think this is the part where my camera started working again, so let's cut back to earlier me. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I love me a fast-paced book, and this is so fast-paced in so many senses of the word. This is also a big treat for fans of the Cosmere. I wouldn't recommend this if you've not at the very least read the Stormlight Archive, but I don't know, honestly, I'd wait until you've read like most of his other works to read this for the full understanding and enjoyment of all the references. But I enjoyed reading about Nomad facing his inner conflicts, and his companion Auxiliary was a delight. I had fun with this, and the ending reminds you, that the Cosmere still has so much more to be explored. The Hidden Palace by Helene Wecker. This is a follow-up to her book The Golem and the Genie, which follows a Jewish golem named Kava and a Syrian genie named Ahmad trying to find their place living among humans in New York in the early 1900s. And this is an adult historical fantasy that is very rooted in our world, and I enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this more than I enjoyed the first book, actually. I gave this 5 stars. The writing was beautiful. It had a large cast, which kept things interesting. The characters were flawed and had their own struggles that they were trying to overcome. And I was just, I don't know, really pulled into this in a way that for some reason I wasn't with book 1. So I'm really glad that I decided to continue the series, and the author is currently writing a 3rd book. Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is a translated work about Keiko, a Japanese woman in her mid-30s who has worked at the same convenience store for 18 years, and she is definitely neurodivergent in some way and is perfectly content to just work at this store. She's very happy there, but the people around her clearly think that she should be living her life differently. And this was a surprise 5 stars. I enjoyed the heck out of it, but it just got really weird. There are some really unlikable characters that were like so ridiculous. I was just making these faces, incredulous faces, and just being taken aback by the dialogue constantly. This is a commentary on aspects of Japanese society, and you're kind of looking at it through a funhouse mirror, I think. The writing in this won't be for everyone, but I loved it, and I want to read more by the author. And the final thing I read to try and really get into the spirit of spring was Flower Heart by Catherine Bakewell. This is about a witch named Clara who has magic that is wild and just out of control, and it ends up endangering her papa's life, and she has to work with her childhood friend Javier to maintain her powers, to master her powers to save him. And sadly, even though I adore the cover of this, I gave this 2 stars. Clara's magic manifested as flowers, which was very cute, and its unruliness is a metaphor for depression, which I totally understand, but the world building here is non-existent, and things just arbitrarily happened conveniently to either advance or to hinder the plot. And there's a whole subplot with Clara's mom that was totally half-baked. Javier was just like a mess of a character, and this was just not very good on the whole, even though I love the cover and I wanted to like it, but yeah, it wasn't that great. So those are all the books I've read so far this year. That's a lot to cram into one, but yeah, I just wasn't feeling like filming, so I finally mustered up the gumption to do it today. I hope that you enjoyed and maybe found some books that you hadn't heard of, maybe some that you have, and you got to see my thoughts on it. I think I'm going to go and go right into filming the Court of Wings and Ruin review that I have put together, so I can just kind of get a bunch of videos finally up and out. I can finally put all of these away. I tend to keep my books that I haven't filmed videos for just in stacks, like a little red stack of red books. So I have a bunch of little holes in my library where I really want to slot these books back in. So I'll finally be able to put all these away. So thank you so much for joining, and hello, good to see you if you're a regular on my channel, and welcome if you're new here, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!